We're so glad you're with us. Before we get started, we just want to remind you that there is some great content for kids at our Greenford Kids YouTube channel.
No matter where you're watching from, your kids
or grandkids,
that's right, grandkids too, can watch biblically based content that helps them grow in their walk with Jesus.
We have 2 channels of content for both preschool and elementary ages where we talk about how much God loves them and how He wants to be a part of their life.
So just go to YouTube and type in Kids at GCC to get access to all of our content.
Again, we're so glad you're with us today. Now let's worship together.
The reign of darkness now is ending in the kingdom of light, in the kingdom of light. Forever under your dominion, you're the king of my life, you're the king of my life. You reign above it all, you reign above it all, over the universe and over every heart. There is no higher name, Jesus, you reign above it all. On the cross the work was finished. God, you poured out your life just to give us new life. And now from the lips of the forgiven, hear an anthem arise, 'cause Jesus, you're alive. You reign above it all, you reign above it all, over the universe and over every heart. There is no higher name, Jesus, you reign above it all. Let all of heaven and the earth erupt in song. Sing hallelujah to the everlasting one. There is no higher name, Jesus, you reign above it all. Oh, you reign above it all. You sent the darkness running out of an empty grave, seated alone in glory, enthroned on the highest praise. You sent the darkness running out of an empty grave, seated alone in glory, enthroned on the highest praise. You sent the darkness running out of an empty grave, seated alone in glory, enthroned on the highest praise. You set the darkness running out of an empty grave, now seated alone in glory, enthroned on the highest praise. You reign above it all, you reign above it all, over the universe and over every heart. There is no higher name, Jesus, you reign above it all. Let all of heaven and the earth erupt in song. Sing hallelujah to the everlasting one. There is no higher name, Jesus, you reign above it all. You reign above it all. you reign above it all.
In the book of Luke, we read about the wonderful acts of Jesus. Luke tells us about an encounter Jesus had with a sinful woman in the 7th chapter. Starting in verse 44, it says this: "Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, 'Look at this woman kneeling here. When I entered your home, you didn't offer me water to wash the dust from my feet, but she has washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't greet me with a kiss, but from the time I first came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. You neglected the courtesy of olive oil to anoint my head, but she has anointed my feet with rare perfume. I tell you, her sins, and they are many, have been forgiven. So she has shown me much love. But a person who is forgiven little shows only little love.' Then Jesus said to the woman, 'Your sins are forgiven.'"
When we come to our time of communion, we often focus on the fact that Jesus paid the penalty for our sin so that we can be forgiven. This is the foundation of our faith, and it is extremely important. The account of this woman is imperative to understanding why Jesus came. He came to restore our relationship with God and remind us that it's He who we should worship. Look closely again at that scripture. "You didn't offer me water to wash the dust from my feet, but she has washed them with her tears. She has not stopped kissing my feet. She has anointed my feet with rare perfume." These are acts of honor and worship. A simple definition of worship is aiming our affection and attention towards something or someone. As you take communion today, thank God for sending Jesus to take away our sins. Thank Jesus for giving His life for you, and worship Him.
My Jesus, I love thee. I know thou art mine. For thee all the follies of sin I resign. Thy
We've said many times that the people at Greenford Christian Church are very generous people. We've experienced God's blessings in so many ways because of your generosity.
So thank you for your continued generosity through giving. It's making a big difference. We want to remind you that you can do that by writing a check and mailing it to the church office or by going to greenfordchristian.org/mygcc.
Hey, GCC Online, I hope everyone is doing well. Last week, we started a brand new series titled Unshakable, When Culture and Conviction Collide. And we're going to be walking our way through the story of Daniel. Now, his story is found in the Old Testament book named after him, the book of Daniel. And today we're going to be looking at chapter 2. And as we get into it today, I want to ask a question. Do you remember November 13th of 2015? Now, probably not at first glance. However, the 13th of November of 2015 is when there was a serious terror attack on Paris, France, that left at least 129 dead and hundreds more injured. And after that tragic event, social media was set afire with the hashtag #PrayForParis, along with photos like these, to let the people of Paris know that they were in our thoughts and in our prayers. And while most found the sentiment edifying and comforting and even uniting, not everyone actually appreciated the gesture. Take, for example, the response of Joanne Spar, a cartoonist for Charlie Hebdo. She said, "Friends from the whole world, thank you for hashtag #PrayForParis. But we don't need more religion. Our faith goes to music, kisses, life, champagne, and joy. Hashtag Paris is about life." Now, rather than seeking peace through prayer, Spar believes that religion itself is the cause of conflict and strife. Now, I understand that it is an opinion, and she's entitled to have it. And truthfully, though, outside of the occasional tragic event, there are a lot of people in our culture that don't have a lot of patience for faith and religion. They think that it has caused more harm than good, and they would like it to go away, quite honestly, to not interfere with their desires and their wants that they want from their life. I mean, after all, if we could just free the world of religion, we would at least find peace, not to mention kisses and life, champagne and joy. And sadly, that's what a lot of people think. And then you have the people of faith that don't really know how to deal with a culture that is sort of anti-God. So we often react in ways that truthfully aren't God-honoring. We say mean things on social media. We lash out about our political views, and we get into the war of words with those that don't see eye to eye with our set of beliefs, which leaves us with the question, what do you do when culture and conviction collide? What happens, and how do we react? You see, when it comes to living in a culture that doesn't see faith the same way that you do, many Christians often choose, one of two responses, either assimilation or separation. Now, assimilation means that you gradually look like everyone else. As I said last week, I use the words blend in. Their values become your values. Your lifestyle kind of imitates the culture's lifestyle. And you end up looking so much like the culture around you that no one can really see anything different or distinctive about you and your lifestyle. However, separation, it's the opposite. And last week I called it freak out mode, right? You see the world as evil, so you put yourself and your family, or you pull yourself and your family away from the world. You hear people say, I don't want my kids influenced by those people over there, or those thoughts, or those ideals. So I'll just simply pull away from all of it and sort of isolate myself. And see, if I'm not part of that, then I won't be influenced negatively. And see, what's interesting is that if you look at the prophet Jeremiah, he actually says the opposite. He said that God's will for the Israelites, okay, the people of faith in that culture at that moment that he was writing this, was not to stay separate from the culture of Babylon, which was far from God, but they were actually to infiltrate it and influence it. In fact, he wrote a letter to all of the exiles in Babylon in Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 4 through 7. Listen to what he writes. He said, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Have sons and daughters and increase in number there. Do not decrease," he said. "Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile, and pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper." See, we're not supposed to huddle up in small groups singing Kumbaya, waiting for Jesus to come back. We're actually called to live and to be in Babylon, seeking the well-being of the city or the community that we live in and praying for it. Because if it prospers, then we too prosper. Now, as we're going to see as we dig into the book of Daniel, most Jews in Daniel's day are very similar to a lot of Christians today. They think the options are either assimilation or separation. We either have to kind of blend in and hopefully people won't notice, or we kind of freak out and we pull away. But there's actually a third option, and that option is transformation. And what that means is that I'm going to live my life in a way that is different and distinctive from the culture in which I live every day. See, I want my life to be different, but I also want to impact others who are far from Christ. I want my life to actually make a difference. I want to live in such a way in a culture that people take notice, that they begin to ask questions about the faith that I have because I'm living differently. I don't want them to be turned off by it or offended because of the way that I'm living. I want to see transformation in others because of what I'm doing. So I'm not going to assimilate. I'm not going to separate. I'm not going to blend in. I'm not going to freak out. And as followers of Jesus, we should settle in our hearts that we are sent people, okay? Jesus said in Matthew 28 to go and to make disciples. And just like we're going to see today, Daniel and his friends take on Babylonian names. They speak Babylonian language. They work in a Babylonian palace, but they do so as faithful servants of God. So, how do we do that? How do we change the perspective of people who are not yet believers or not yet followers of Jesus? How do we live in a culture that is sometimes resistant to faith? Well, turn to Daniel chapter 2, and let's dig in and find out today. Now, I'm going to do just a little bit of recap from where we left off last week in chapter 1. Israel has this really awful king by the name of Jehoiakim, who did not lead his people to honor God and God's commands. And we need to understand that the Israelites were a lot like you and me today. They meant well. They kept making commitments to God, and then they would break those commitments due oftentimes to their own pride or their own sin or their own rebellion. However, God, being the patient God that he is, kept warning them over and over and over again that if they continued to walk that path, that he would eventually send them into exile. So in 605 BC, God keeps his promise. Because of the disobedience of Israel, which is where Daniel grew up, God allowed them to be defeated by a godless pagan empire called Babylon that was led by a pagan leader named King Nebuchadnezzar. And once Babylon took over Israel, they took the best of the entire culture. They went in and they took the best of the economy. They took the best of the arts. They took the best talent, and they took it all back with them to Babylon. So Babylon can absorb that into their culture, and they can become even a stronger empire. And in the midst of this, you've got Daniel and his 3 friends. Now, these boys at the time were likely between the ages of 14 and 15 years old. And they're sort of ripped away from their families. They're forced to take a 700-mile journey back to Babylon. And they're enrolled in a training school designed to make them Babylonian. Their language has changed. Their culture has changed. Their family is ultimately taken away. Okay, they're not with them. And anything that is distinctive about their relationship with God, the Babylonian culture tries to take that away. And instead of getting angry, instead of rising up, instead of complaining about what they don't have or they're not getting or what they lost, instead, Daniel and his friends, they decide to live their life by the truth that you and I need to be reminded of today. And that is that God is in control, even when things seem out of control. So let's jump into Daniel chapter 2, verse 1. One night, during the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such a disturbing dream that he could not sleep. So he calls in his magicians, his enchanters, his sorcerers, and astrologers, and he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed. See, now, it's important for us to know that in Babylonian culture, when you had a dream, it was thought that your dreams were messages from the gods that they worshiped. And it's also important to understand that Nebuchadnezzar was the king, okay? So sort of put yourself in this context. So he had important decisions to make for his kingdom, and he probably, on top of that, was a bit paranoid, okay? Constantly looking over his shoulder, wondering who was going to try and kill him, who was going to try and get rid of him, who was going to try to take over his throne. I mean, after all, assassinations were very common in that day and a legitimate concern if you were king. In fact, history will show us that the next 3 Babylonian kings, they would all be assassinated. Interesting, right? So Nebuchadnezzar needs to know what this dream means. So it's kind of increased a little bit of anxiety in his life. So he brings in these astrologers, he brings in his sorcerers, and he demands that they interpret the dream. But in a brilliant leadership move, he basically tells them, I'm not going to tell you what I dreamed. I just want you to tell me what I dreamed, and that way I know that I can be confident that you can interpret it. Impressive, right? And then we see the magicians and astrologers' response in verse 10, which is exactly what we would all expect. All right, look at verse 10. No one on earth can tell the king his dream, they said, and no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. And the king's demand is impossible, they said. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people. The king was furious when he heard this, and he ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed. And because of the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends. So some of you, if you're reading this, you're thinking, what in the world is happening here? Why has an edict gone out now to kill Daniel and his friends? They're not part of this deal. See, well, Daniel has likely already finished his 3-year Babylonian training program. And if you recall, again, he was like 14 or 15 years old when he got started. So he's likely now 17, maybe even 18 years old. And since he has finished this training program, he's considered one of the king's men, which means that he's guilty by association. Crazy, right? I told you King Nebuchadnezzar was a little crazy. Well, in Daniel chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, it says, when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. Wisdom and discretion. Now think about this. You're about to lose your life, okay? So he asked Arioch, why has the king issued such a harsh decree? So Arioch told him all that had happened. Now, first of all, let's go back to chapter 1. Remember, God gave him favor with Arioch. Okay, that's important. Second, can we all agree that if someone was coming to kill you or me, we would probably not handle it with wisdom and discernment, okay? We would probably go into, as we talked about earlier, kind of freak out mode. But Daniel goes all Liam Neeson on us, right? Calm, cool, and collected. He basically says, I have a very particular set of skills that I've acquired over a long career. All right, all kidding aside, the Bible doesn't tell us the specifics about Arioch and Daniel's conversation, but I would imagine it happened something like this. Arioch walks in the room and he closes the door behind him. He sits down and he looks at Daniel in the eyes and he says, hey, just between you and me, Nebuchadnezzar is off his rocker. He's paranoid. He's a little irritable. He's not sleeping well these days. And he's having these crazy off-the-wall dreams. And he's not in a good spot. Okay? So that's why we're all in this situation right here. And then I love verse 16 of Daniel 2. Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. Impressive, right? Just walks in and asks for more time. And for whatever reason, Nebuchadnezzar gives it to him. And we don't really know why, but we can surmise that it's because of the way that Daniel has been conducting himself since he arrived in Babylon a couple of years earlier. He's been engaged. He's been respectful. He's worked hard. He's not caused a scene. He's not made it about himself or all that he's lost in this deal. Okay? He has been thoughtful. He has been wise. He's used discretion. And we can see that Nebuchadnezzar respects Daniel at some level because of the way that he's been living his life. So King Nebuchadnezzar grants him the extra time to interpret the dream. Now, in verse 17 and 18, it gets a little interesting, right? Daniel goes back to his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he says, hey guys, we need to huddle up here. I've got some news. We've got a little bit of an issue on our hands. I just need all of you to know that I sort of promised the king that we need a little bit more time and that we can actually interpret his dream. And I would imagine in that very moment when the words came out of his mouth, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were like, you did what? Why in the world would you ask or promise such a crazy thing? We've never once interpreted a dream. And I can imagine Daniel, okay, again, calm, cool, and collected, sort of shrugging his shoulders and saying, well, we just need to pray and we need to ask God to help us to know what the dream is so we can interpret it. And so I love this part in verse 18. Oh, and by the way, guys, we need to do this so we won't be executed with all the other wise men that just lost their life because they couldn't interpret the dream. Well, look at verses 19 through 23. That night, the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. And then Daniel praised the God of heaven. And he said, praise the name of God forever and ever, for he has all wisdom and power. He controls the course of the world events. He removes kings and sets up other kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in the darkness. Though he's surrounded by light. I thank and praise you, God, I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we asked of you, and you revealed to us what the king demanded. See, right here is Daniel's moment. He's been faithfully living for God within a culture that quite honestly is far from God. And he's been very patient. He's been very wise. And he's living with discernment, okay? And now he's got a moment. And can I just say to you, if you've been doing this sort of thing day in and day out, you've been taking bold steps of faith, you've been trying to show the love of Jesus to the people around you every day, that you've been investing in those around you, that maybe they don't believe what you believe, there will come a moment just like this. And in verses 27 and 28, it says, Daniel replied, there are no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or fortune tellers who can reveal the king's secret. I love this, verse 28. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the future. Now I will tell you your dream and the visions that you saw as you lay in your bed. And right there, I just love Daniel's boldness, okay? I don't have time now today to read all of the verses because it's quite lengthy, but I want to summarize it. He describes this dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in which there was a very large statue in the dream. And the statue represents the subsequent kingdoms of men throughout time. For instance, the head in the dream was made of gold, and that represented Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. And then the chest and the arms are made of silver, most likely representing Persia. And the torso and the thighs were bronze and likely representing Greece. And the legs were made of iron, possibly representing Rome. And the feet and the toes were a mixture of iron and clay. And this represents every nation since the beginning of time. And what I want you to notice is that all of these empires, all of these nations look really, really impressive from the outside looking in, yet they're all built on a very unstable foundation. See, Daniel goes on and he says in verses 34 and 35, as you watched, a rock was cut from the mountain, but not by human hands. It struck the feet of iron and clay, smashing them into bits. And that whole statue was crushed into small pieces of iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold. And then the wind blew them away without a trace, like chaff on a threshing floor. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain that covered the whole earth. Now, the million-dollar question, what does the rock represent? It's a great question, right? Well, the rock represents Jesus. And we know this for a couple of reasons. You noticed earlier in the text that it says that it was cut not by human hands. And the second is something that actually Jesus said of himself in Luke chapter 20, verses 17 and 18, a couple thousand years later. The stone that the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. Everyone who stumbles over that stone will be broken to pieces. See, Jesus is referencing or referring to himself here. Jesus is the rock in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, interestingly enough. See, the book of Daniel is not just about Daniel. The book of Daniel actually is a foreshadowing of Jesus. And this is unimpressive according to the world, right? Being compared to gold and silver and bronze, the things that the world puts so much weight into and so much value on. But see, what God is trying to tell Nebuchadnezzar, and he's really trying to tell us, are those are the things that actually don't have a solid foundation. Because one day, a rock will strike that foundation, and all of the kingdoms of men, no matter how impressive, no matter how powerful, no matter how mighty, will crumble and will simply be blown away. Now, this isn't God's vengeance upon the nations. This is God promising the new heaven and the new earth. This is God promising that his kingdom will ultimately prevail over all of those things that we oftentimes find value in. And how can I say that? Because it says the rock becomes a mountain. Look in verses 46 and 47. Then King Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel, and he worshiped him. And he commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burn sweet incense before him. And the king said to Daniel, truly, your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal his secret. Now, at first glance, this kind of sounds good, right? Sounds like good news. However, this really just reveals to me that Nebuchadnezzar really doesn't get what Daniel's trying to get him to see. First, he worships Daniel, not God. Interesting, right? And I want you to notice that it never in these moments goes to Daniel's head, which I think is something we need to kind of latch onto, because there's so many times in our world where God does amazing things in our life. And here's the thing. So many times we never stop and actually give him the credit that he deserves. See, oftentimes we take the accolades that actually aren't ours to take. The only thing that you need to catch for later on in the study is this, that Nebuchadnezzar is all excited, okay? Which is interesting, right? And very strange, because Daniel just told him that his kingdom is actually going to crumble. Yet he's excited in the moment. See, Nebuchadnezzar is not listening. He's just relieved that somebody interpreted his dream. However, Daniel, in all of this, still gets a promotion. Only God, right? Look at verses 48 and 49. Then the king appointed Daniel to a high position and gave him many valuable gifts. He, he made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chief over all of his wise men. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be in charge of all of the affairs of the province of Babylon, while Daniel remained in the king's court. And see, what I want you to see is that these previous two chapters, from the age of 14 to the age of 17 or 18, Daniel has gone from being a victim to being the second most powerful man in the most powerful empire in the known world at that time. Now, you might be wondering, so what in the world does all this have to do with me, and what's the application for you and me today? See, what are the takeaways for us to implement into our lives? Well, after all, I very seriously doubt tomorrow you're going to show up at work and your boss is going to walk in your office and go, hey, I've kind of been having these crazy dreams and I think I need your help. All right. We know that's not going to happen. But there are a couple of things that I want you to chew on and sort of take away from today. And the first is this, that God is at work even when things aren't the way that we want them. God is at work even when things aren't the way that I want them. See, anybody need reminded of that today? I mean, think about that. I think we all do. Daniel has been ripped away from everything he knew and everything that was safe in his life. And he could have gotten mad. He could have given a whole lot of pushback. He could have prayed for God to strike them or to judge them or to punish them or to do something. But instead, Daniel makes the decision that he, along with his friends, they're going to live for God within a godless culture. And instead of running and hiding, they make the choice to impact the world that they live in. And see, this is the message, okay? And this message has never been more relevant than it is right now today. And it's the message we need to grab onto. So please hear me. If you are a follower of Jesus, what that means is that you are just like the Israelites that we're reading about in exile, Daniel, his friends, and the other people that they took. So you've got a decision to make. Maybe rather than isolating or assimilating, instead of maybe freaking out or just kind of trying to blend in and hope nobody notices, what would it look like for you to develop deep, meaningful relationships with people who don't yet know Jesus? What would it look like to live out your faith, even if the situation that you're in is a bit resistant to Jesus? Am I just going to retreat and hope God makes this a Christian nation once again, or hope that God gets our guy in the office? Or will I actually engage culture? Will I work for the good of the city or the community that I live in, and I'll do that for God? Will I build relationships with people who don't yet know Him yet, and hopefully that they can see and hear Jesus within me in the way I conduct myself? See, hear me. That's going to require courage. It's going to require wisdom. It's going to require sound judgment, none of which you usually find on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. You don't find it on the news media. You don't find it on your favorite radio station. So you find it only through a relationship with God. And we have to engage the world around us. We have to be Jesus to the world that doesn't yet know Him, because we're God's plan A. So please hear my heart. For far too long, Christians have had this kind of persona or attitude that we're kind of the good guys, and those people over there that are different than us, they're kind of the bad guys. But the truth is this, we're all bad guys. There's only one saving good guy, and His name is Jesus Christ, and He's called us to live for Him, which leads me to the second thing that I want you to chew on today. And that is, being a follower of Jesus is centered on good news. Okay, it's centered on good news. And my guess is that we really aren't all that different from Nebuchadnezzar, each and every one of us. We're all building a kingdom of some kind. For some of us, maybe your kingdom is your career. For others tuning in, it's your image or your influence on social media. Maybe for you, it's a relationship that you have. Maybe it's with your spouse or kids or somebody else. For some of you, it's your children's education or the sports that they're so involved in. I mean, truthfully, it can be anything. And if you are building your life on anything other than Jesus Christ, you're gonna find out that it's gonna be empty and hollow in the long run. That's just the game. That's part of it. It doesn't have a stable foundation. See, if you're chasing greatness or self-worth, you will always be haunted by anxiety and worry. If you're building your life on your image, you will always fall apart when people say things that are mean or hurtful towards you. If you're building your life on money, you will always be fearful that you don't have enough, or you're scared of what's happening in the stock market because you could lose it all overnight. If you're building your life on your looks, you will always be fearful of what's happening in the mirror in front of you as you age. See, it is feet of clay that at some point in each and every one of our lives, something is going to strike it. It's just going to happen. Your health, an issue in your marriage, an accident, a deal will fall through. Something will strike the foundation and your world will begin to spin out of control because truthfully, you were never really in control of it. And the thing you need to know is that the difference between being a Christian and a non-Christian, and I know this might shock some of you, is not what we believe. It's not just how we behave, and it's not how we vote. The key difference of being a Christian and a non-Christian is the foundation that we're actually building our life on. See, God is simply asking Christ followers to step into, to not freak out over the cultural climate, that there's nothing new under the sun, that we're called not to blend in, okay? You don't need to be embarrassed about being a follower of Jesus. See, God's word always stands true, and you stand secure, and you're to ferociously love people the way that God ferociously loves you. And we're supposed to live with an equal amount of grace and truth. And that's daily work for each of us, okay? Because they're the only things, grace and truth, that can actually change the world. And that always comes through God's people, living out God's principles in a world that desperately needs to see God through God's people. So let me pray for you. God in heaven, we thank you for this day. And God, we know that there is a lot of turmoil in our culture and truthfully in our world. And there's lots of things that are on our minds and on our hearts that we worry about. And God, I pray that that we become more and more like Daniel as we go through this series. That we realize that things don't always go the way that we want. That our life doesn't always turn out the way that we had planned. But the truth is that you're involved in all of the details. And my prayer today is that we won't blend in, that we won't assimilate, that we won't freak out or sort of pull back from culture, but God, that we will live a life of transformation, that our lives are being transformed because we're in a journey with you, and then because of that journey and because of the way that we live, other people's lives can be transformed because we engage with them with love and grace and truth. But we do it in a way that honors you. So God, I just pray that you give us situations like Daniel, where a door will be opened and we will be bold enough to have conversations with people, to share our faith, not in an aggressive way or in a hateful way, not in a we're right, we're the good guys and you're the bad guys, but just a way that would show that you are at work in our lives and that people would be intrigued and want to know more. So God, help us to be that kind of people and be with us through the rest of this study as we see that Daniel's life is going to be tested and his faith is going to come into play. And God, we want to be more and more like him and be bold and ferociously in love with you and know that you have it all under control. So God, today we put our faith and our hope and our trust in you, and we ask for those moments, and that you give us wisdom when we speak, that we speak your words, that we speak truth and love, and God, that it changes people's lives. We ask all of this in your Son's most holy and precious name. Amen.
Sean wrapped up his sermon by saying the key difference in being a Christian or a non-Christian is the foundation we are building our life on. It's our prayer that you're building your life on the foundation of Jesus Christ.
That's right. And we're here to help you and your family do just that. If you want to reach out to us, just chat with one of your chat hosts or email us at the address below. And remember, we have songs, sermons, kid content, and more at our Greenford YouTube channel.
We're so glad you joined us today. Be sure and have a friend join you sometime for an online service, or at least send them to checkoutchurchonline.com. It could make a huge difference in their life.
Thanks for being part of our Greenford online family. Have a great week.